Welcome to all of you. Today's lecture is on Nature and Scope of Ethics Part 2. In Part 1 of this lecture series on the nature and scope of ethics, we discussed issues concerning the nature of morality, the nature of moral dilemmas, the relation between morality and ethics, and the nature and source of the moral law. While discussing the nature of the moral law, we saw that different thinkers give diverse views about what the sources of our most general moral maxims such as do good and avoid evil are, and what their meta-ethical understanding of the idea of good is. For instance, Aristotle would identify good with eudaimonia and virtue. Kant would call it duty. J.S. Mill would identify it with the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Carrot and Pritchard would call it rightness of specific acts. Sidgwick would identify it as the principle of utility, while Ross would identify good with a set of principles. Moore, on the other hand, would say good is itself indefinable. We cannot define good. Yet, despite their inherent differences, most deontological theories would accept that whatever be the source of morality, whether human or divine, at least the general moral laws and principles are known intuitively in and through human consciousness. However, since moral laws appear both as general principles such as do good and avoid evil, as well as their particular instantiations such as killing is wrong or being courageous is a virtue, the question arises as to how the general moral dictums come to be universally known and followed, how particular principles come to be derived from the general maxims, and why despite the presence of universal moral laws, there are differences and disagreements in individual and specific judgments concerning moral value and moral worth. The search for a comprehensive answer to these questions guides us towards an exploration of human nature itself, which can be approached from the point of view of the evolution of the human species and the concurrent evolution of human consciousness. The biological theory of evolution given by Charles Darwin gains an ethical interpretation in the work of Herbert Spencer. For Herbert Spencer, moral intuitions or instincts appear as the inductively organized results of experiential knowledge which is received and passed on by the human race from one generation to another. Herbert Spencer sees evolution as a teleological process which is directed towards the establishment of an ideal moral order. Spencer begins by observing that both human and animal conduct consists in acts which are adjusted and directed towards certain ends. The higher we proceed in the scale of evolution, the easier it becomes for us to obtain evidence of purposeful actions that are either directed towards the good of the individual or towards that of the species as a whole. This purposeful activity may form part of the struggle for existence waged between individual members of the same species or between different species. But this type of conduct, according to Herbert Spencer, is an imperfectly evolved conduct. The perfectly evolved conduct, which is in fact ethical or moral conduct, according to Herbert Spencer, during the ongoing struggle for existence yields into the values of mutual cooperation and support, such that egoism comes to be transcended. This allows Spencer to draw a distinction between absolute ethics and relative ethics. Absolute ethics is identified by Spencer as an ideal code of conduct, which guides the behavior of the completely adapted human person in the completely evolved society. Relative ethics, on the other hand, is the nearest approximation to this ideal according to the more or less perfectly evolved society in which a human person happens to find herself or himself. The method of ethics will be deductive if we think that there are universal and objective moral rules or laws that are applicable to all humans in all conditions, and our moral precepts can be obtained with the help of deduction of moral laws. Moral absolutism follows this moral method. On the other hand, the method of ethics will be inductive if we think that moral rules or moral principles are psychological or social facts and change with the changes in social customs and individual desires. Moral relativism follows this line of thought about moral method. Taking happiness to be the ultimate end of life, Herbert Spencer suggests that moral rightness and wrongness of a certain action is to be measured on the basis of how far it promotes the attainment of this end. He speculates that in the earliest stages of human development, this utilitarian principle of happiness might have been dependent upon certain non-ethical and authoritarian beliefs. However, in the due course of development, the principle gained the status of an independent ideal or a moral law. This idea of human development, as well as the development of human consciousness itself, also allows us to understand how the general moral laws perhaps come to be particularized in the form of specific moral judgments. As humans become more and more conscious of themselves as individuals and as social beings, they also become more conscious of their human interrelatedness and of their rights and duties as human persons. This clearer self consciousness is what becomes concretized and particularized in the form of specific moral precepts. At any given stage of the development of human moral consciousness, different individuals living in different situations and contexts end up actualizing a more or less different moral life. Such differences can arise out of geographical, climatic or economic conditions. Moreover, since moral consciousness has also been intimately linked to and conditioned by religious consciousness, different religious beliefs to have led to the realization of different moral values. And it is perhaps for this very reason that a change in religious consciousness has often brought about a corresponding change in moral outlook. While the history of religion affords us with many examples, for example, human sacrifice, burning of wishes, etc. Yet it needs to be acknowledged that this change is primarily and directly in religious consciousness and only secondarily and indirectly in moral consciousness. It is a change in the religiously conditioned morality. The constant variation in life situations translate into a parallel variation in moral deliberation. thinking and reflection on the part of the individuals concerned. These deliberations not only concern the immediate facts at hand, but also include reflections on our attitudes, worldviews, relatedness of all those involved. This process of thinking and reflection is what may be identified as the concrete means of particularization and concretization of general moral principles or maxims. Unlike what Aquinas would suggest, this process is not merely a logical deduction whereby the premises are analyzed to yield a certain conclusion. Rather, this process is infused with human experiences, emotions, our values, virtues, concerns and beliefs. Following the theory of Philip Wheelwright, we may theoretically identify the following phases of the process of moral particularization, which helps us reach specific moral judgments. First, we begin with the examination and clarification of the alternatives, where we try to understand the relevant possibilities of a particular action in the situation confronting us. Next, we have rational elaboration of consequences, where we analyze some particulars for which analogies can be found in our past experience or to which known laws of causal sequence are applicable. This is followed by imaginative projection of self into the predicted situation. Since it is not enough to reason out the probable consequences of a choice, therefore, in a moral deliberation, the chief interests involved are not scientific, but human and practical. The only way to judge the comparative desirability of two possible future outcomes would thereby also involve living through the available alternatives in imagination. Imaginative identification of the self with the points of view of those persons whom the proposed act will most seriously affect. Estimation and comparison of the values involved in the available alternatives. Eventually, we reach a decision which is arrived at by the comparison of the alternative future situation and the values embodied in each. Finally, we realize an action which appears as the concrete means by which we carry out the decision which has been reached through these steps. It needs to be noted that these processes are, however, not arranged in terms of any particular temporal order. In more philosophical terms, one may ask, if the human person is forever conditioned by his/her existential situation, and if the moral consciousness of humans is always in a process of development and flux, and furthermore dependent on cultural, social, psychological, contextual and other such factors, then can an individual ever be certain of having reached the objective moral truth? So, the overall variability in moral principles and attitudes raises certain extremely critical questions regarding the kind of certitude we can have in matters of morality. One may ask, if what is believed to be morally right today can be proved to be morally wrong tomorrow and vice versa, then can one ever be absolutely certain of what is morally right or morally wrong? In response to these concerns and on the basis of the description of human nature given earlier, it may be pointed out that while on the one hand there are indeed certain universally recognizable and intuitively realizable moral maxims that indicate objectivity. There are also individualistic and contextual instantiations of those very general principles which constitute the element of subjectivity. It is important here to draw a distinction between moral relativity and ethical relativism. Moral relativity is simply the view that different people, especially in different civilizations and cultures, have or have had different moral beliefs, and what is believed to be morally right at a given time or place may be taken to be morally wrong at a different time or place. This is an undeniable empirical fact. On the other hand, ethical relativism is the philosophical theory which postulates that no foundation exists as such, that is, there is no universal moral norm or basic moral principle, and whatever is morally right is entirely relative to the individual or group in question. When a theory gives reasons in favor of such a position, then it amounts to ethical relativism in the strict sense. However, if it cannot give reasons but simply admits that it is conceivably impossible to say what is morally right and morally wrong, then such a standpoint can be called ethical skepticism. A careful study of the evolution of human persons' self-consciousness and of moral knowledge helps one to discover a certain progression, owing to which individuals become more and more drawn towards a realization of themselves and their true nature. They are constantly becoming more and more aware of what they really are. Their moral knowledge is helping them recognize themselves and others around them as persons. Like most spheres of knowledge, moral knowledge too seems to be founded on the need for questions, debates, and temporary disagreements. If progress is at all to be made, a state of incertitude on some issues appears to be a prerequisite and the presupposition for any kind of progress, advancement, and deeper understanding of morality as such, and our moral nature in particular. Having discussed several aspects of the nature of the moral law, let us now try to again recapitulate some significant points about the nature and scope of ethics. Insofar as ethics involves a study of moral principles and tells us which actions are right or wrong, good or bad, it may be described as an action oriented and a value oriented study. The first postulate which guides ethics is the postulate of action, or more specifically voluntary action. Human actions which carry with them an underlying intention on the part of the agent presuppose the possibility of making a free and informed choice. The postulate of value implies that a choice is to be made among alternatives, which not only signify value, but also almost always a value which is comparable in significant respects. If an action or an outcome holds no value for the agent, he or she would not feel inclined towards making any judgment or actuating a choice with respect to it. The postulate of non-actuality or imperfection of the world explains why there is a need and a demand to choose among options. The need for choosing presupposes that there is already a gap between what is and what ought to be. In a perfect world, the ideal ends would already have been actualized. leaving no gap between what is and what ought to be, and thereby leaving no scope for morality and ethics. Finally, the postulate of permanence presupposes that the consequences of the action being chosen or undertaking must be permanent in nature and not related to a temporary fulfillment of desires. So, now coming to the approaches to the study of ethics. There are 4 different approaches to the study of ethics. Scholar Tom L. Weechamp, in his book Philosophical Ethics, An Introduction to Moral Philosophy, presents them with the following diagram: non-normative approaches and normative approaches. So, there is 2 approaches under non-normative approaches, one is descriptive and another is metaethics, and under normative approaches there are general normative ethics and applied ethics. The non-normative approaches examine morality without the concern for making judgments about deciding what is morally right or what is morally wrong. They do not take any moral position regarding moral issues. The normative approaches, on the other hand, make concrete judgments which are meant to help us decide what is morally right or what is morally wrong. They take a clear moral position regarding moral issues. Among the 2 non-normative approaches to ethics, descriptive ethics describes and sometimes tries to explain the moral and ethical practices and beliefs of certain societies and cultures. This is what sociologists, anthropologists and historians often do in their study and research. In their descriptions, they do not make judgments about the morality of the practices and beliefs, but simply describe the practices observed in the different groups or cultures. The whole study of ethics can be divided into general ethics, which deals with the nature of moral activity, norms of morality, foundation of morality, end of morality, and so on, and special ethics, which applies the principles of general ethics to the various actions of human activity. However, when we consider the ethical theories themselves, philosophers usually divide them into 3 broad areas: first, metaethics; second, normative ethics; and third, applied ethics. Normative ethics tries to arrive at moral standards that regulate right and wrong conduct. It is a more practically oriented study. One may say that it is a search for an ideal litmus test of proper behavior. Metaethics investigates the origin and meaning of ethical concepts. It studies where our ethical principles come from and what they mean. It tries to analyze the underlying principles of ethical values. Applied ethics involves an examination of specific ethical issues such as abortion, infanticide, animal rights, and so on. In applied ethics, using the conceptual tools of metaethics and normative ethics, one tries to understand and resolve these controversial issues. Often the demarcation between metaethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics appears blurred. For instance, the issue of abortion is a topic of applied ethics in as much as it involves a specific type of ethically debatable behavior, but it is also an issue involving normative principles such as the right of self-rule and the right to life, and metaethical issues such as where do rights come from and what kind of beings have rights. Finally, it needs to be clarified that despite being identified as a scientific study, ethics needs to be differentiated from other natural sciences. Unlike the natural sciences, which are concerned with a systematic study of concrete objects and uniformities in nature, ethics seems to be primarily concerned with a study of human conduct, value, its sources, its objects, and its nature. In this respect, ethics can be identified as a regulative science, for it tries to understand the rules and principles which regulate human conduct, and simultaneously tries to inform us about what the ideal human conduct should be like. Although ethics is sometimes regarded as a practical science, it is not a practical science as medicine, engineering or architecture, in as much as it is not directed towards the realization of a definite result. We saw in ethics, which is the study of moral conduct, moral principle and the meaning of moral terms, we use the philosophical tools of reasoning, arguments, conceptual analysis, dialectical method and so on. The very method of ethics explains why it happens to be a branch of philosophy. However, whether or not ethics may really be identified as a scientific study is a matter of debate, which is itself open to further questioning and argumentation. Thank you.